Hi, everybody. Welcome to day 4 of the Purpose-Driven Business Summit. We're really glad you made time to join us today for this session because we're going to be hearing from Betsy with Lady Justice Brewing. And I think you're really going to enjoy hearing how they got started and what they're up to because they've got a unique mission and I'm a big fan. So I think once you hear more about what they're up to, you will be too. So before we start talking with Betsy, a couple of reminders. If you're here for the first time, you haven't heard these before, so welcome. All the recordings for all the speaker sessions will be up on YouTube in a playlist that you get the link for. If you go to try to find them, just looking for the Purpose-Driven Business Summit, you actually won't see anything. You have to go in with the link that is going out with all the email correspondence and is also on the Facebook page. We did set up a private Facebook group specifically for the summit so that attendees and speakers could engage with each other. You know, in the days of Zoom and Zoom webinar where you can't actually see and talk to people, we wanted to have a way for folks to share ahas, ideas, share what they're up to, ask questions, and that's what the Facebook group is meant for. So if you haven't been in there, please join us. And if you are already in there, let's hear from you. We'd like to get to know who's attending and what they're getting out of attending the sessions. So those are my logistical reminders. So now we'll get into the good stuff, which is talking to Betsy. So Betsy, thanks a ton for being willing to talk with us today and share about Lady Justice Brewing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So why don't we start with you sharing like a little bit about your background and how did you end up starting a brewery?
Yeah. I joined AmeriCorps in 2009 as a VISTA member, which stands for Volunteers in Service to America. And as a VISTA, you serve in a community. You live at the poverty rate in which that city holds, and you basically do capacity building for nonprofits. And so that was sort of I was working in St. Louis in the church world for about 5 or 6 years, and then I went to graduate school and really didn't know what I was going to do after graduate school. So AmeriCorps was the answer. Making $10,000 a year with a master's degree. My mom was like, "You're going to do what?" So that brought me back to Denver. I did my undergrad at University of Denver. So I had lived here during that time and had left for a few years. And that was really the thing that got me back to Colorado. And so doing VISTA, I met 2 other women, Kate Power and Jen Cuesta, and we served at the same nonprofit together. And it was right in the middle of the recession, and we were trying to fundraise for this really cool nonprofit that should have had no problem raising money. I mean, it was just an incredible mission, and the people on their board and what they were doing, it was just a no-brainer to support them. And there was just no money coming in because of the recession. So grants had dried up and our regular donors just couldn't afford to do it anymore. And so we were having to do cold calls and all of these events that we hadn't ever done before. And it was just hard. And so we would scrounge up the little bit of money that we had and go to a brewery in town and just talk about how much our job sucked. Honestly, we just commiserated about how hard it was to do fundraising work during a recession. And at some point, I think it was Jen, she just sort of said, like, look around this place. We're in the middle of a recession. A lot of people don't have extra money to spend. We make $10,000 a year. We don't have extra money to spend, but yet we found a way to make coming here and drinking beer important enough to spend a few dollars on. And so she was like, why is it that people will spend their money at the brewery and not at the nonprofit? And why wouldn't it be cool if those things were the same? So wouldn't it be cool if the money that we spent here at this brewery somehow ended up helping a nonprofit? And that was the beginning of Lady Justice, really. But to be honest, I mean, that conversation happened, it was just a passing moment thing. It wasn't anything that I honestly remembered talking about until Kate and Jen left to go to law school. And Kate emailed us one day and was like, hey, do you remember that idea that we had about the brewery and fundraising? And I was like, not really, but that sounds cool. And she said, I have this business law class. I need to write a fake business plan. Maybe I can get some feedback on this and see if it would work. And so she got a lot of really great feedback on it and got back to us, to Jen and I, and just said, like, I think we can make this happen. So so they moved back to Denver in 2014, and we just we hit the ground running. We were all dabbled in home brewing before, and we liked to drink beer. So that was basically how we started. So we home brewed together all the time. And then we worked on the business plan and the model for how it was going to work, and slowly built up. We did fundraising in 2015 and opened for business in August of 2016. So that's sort of how we got started. And then the philanthropic piece of that is we donate. At the time when we opened, we were donating 100% of our profits over cost to nonprofits in Colorado that worked with women and girls. And so that was how people's beer money was going to be spent on nonprofits. And we still have that model today. That's
great. So you all had to continue working full-time jobs while you, and are you still working? Like, I know I see you out and about in with the beer. So I know you're like putting your time in.
Yeah, so we all three have day jobs that pay us for sure. Kate and Jen are both lawyers, so their roles are a little bit smaller than mine, just because their law schedules are pretty heavy. And then I do work full time as well in academic higher ed, academic programming, and they're really supportive of what Lady Justice does, and so that's been helpful. But yeah, I do my day job, and then I do a lot of the Lady Justice work on nights and weekends. Yeah. I wake up really early in the morning to get day job and Lady Justice stuff done as well.
Yeah, right. So we're really glad we got you today.
Yeah.
You. And I should, if anybody has questions as Betsy's talking, please put them in the chat, and I'm sure she's glad to, we'll take a look and see if you ask some questions, she'll be glad to answer them. So just want to remind folks of that. So it's kind of a big jump to go from home brewing to doing, figuring out how to do it on a more commercial sort of level. So tell us kind of how that worked. And you've got, oh, I forgot my props. I'm a big fan. So games, and you've got cool new branding. So yeah.
We started as home brewers, so we were making 5-gallon batches at a time and just testing recipes and trying to figure it out. And when we decided that we needed to start fundraising, we really needed to figure out how much money we could raise and what we could afford equipment wise. And anyone will tell you when you're opening a brewery that you should start with a 7-barrel system or a 10-barrel system. We started with a 1.5-barrel system, so we did not take anybody's advice on that. But that was because this model was unique. This philanthropic model was unique. We knew that we were going to be doing it part-time as volunteers. And we couldn't, in 2014, there really wasn't anybody else doing this kind of work. There was a brewery in Texas that had been doing it for a while, but we couldn't really find a lot of information on them. And then we had heard that this guy in Portland was starting to do it as well. But, social enterprise and philanthropic business wasn't quite the buzz that it is today. And so we didn't know if this was going to work. We had no idea. We were like, this could flop. We could fail miserably. And because of that, we didn't want to put ourselves into a lot of debt either. So we found a little 1.5-barrel brew system. So a barrel is 31 gallons of beer. So when we would brew about 45 gallons at a time on our big new fancy system. And so that was affordable enough. So we were able to fundraise. We did an Indiegogo crowdsourcing campaign. Our internal goal that we set for the three of us was to raise $20,000. We set the Indiegogo campaign at 15,000, and we hit that in I think 8 days. And
Wow.
so we're like, okay, people are interested in this, and it works. So we hit our $20,000 goal. We were able to buy the equipment and put down rent on this very, very small space. It was a 300 square foot room inside this kind of like abandoned car garage. It was tiny. So we started off small and we took a lot of baby steps. So that allowed us to learn how to brew sort of incrementally as we grew. So jumping from 5 gallons to 45 gallons wasn't that big of a stretch, right? So the rules were still kind of the same in terms of technique and time and all of that. Not to say that it didn't go terribly a few times, but we got the hang of it after a while.
Homebrew. Yeah, that's part of why I really like your beer, because it's good and my stuff was not.
Yeah. The very first batch of beer that I homebrewed, I don't know, probably 15 years ago, was absolutely awful. So you can improve. Yeah, so we started small. We started very small intentionally, and we just sort of inched along and trusted our gut. And the other issue that we faced was, because we were small, because our brew space is only 300 square feet, we couldn't afford a tap room, and we certainly couldn't fit more than like 10 people in the space at once anyway. And so we needed to come up with a different model to sell our beer than the traditional typical taproom model that was very common in Denver, at least. So we stole the community supported agriculture model, the CSA model. When we were in AmeriCorps, we would, all of our AmeriCorps buddies, we would sort of join in on a farm share together. And that was a cheap way for us to get fresh produce. And so we were like, what if we did something like that? And we didn't know if that was legal or if anybody was doing it. And it is legal, but no one was doing it. And we sort of had to navigate that. So we were doing a couple of things that people hadn't been doing before. So everything was new. And so we just being small is what helped us out. And in the CSA model, we called it a community supported brewery. So we would sell memberships, so do a pre-sale on the beer. So we would sell memberships. People would buy the memberships, and then they would get beer from us once a month for a certain amount of time. I think when we first started, it was a 6-month membership. So people would come by, they'd pick up the beer from us at our production space. And so we started off with 75 members because we knew that we could brew for that, and we could plan for that. And then the great thing was we had all of the money up front. So we had already gotten all of our profit before we even made the beer or gave it away, right? So we were able to get all of the money up front, and then we could afford all of the ingredients immediately, and all of the supplies, and then we knew exactly how much money was left over to donate out. And so that really worked for us for about 2.5 years, and then we grew out of that model and had to change some things, but that was how it started at the beginning.
So from that, and I love the whole community supported brewing model that you guys came up with, which is actually how I first ran across Lady Justice Brewing, because I have been a member, and that's actually where
it's your member beer.
That's where those came from. And it makes it kind of fun because all the time there's different beer, and so you guys have like piloted and made a whole lot of different types of beers, and you come up with some cool names. So tell us a bit about your process there, and how, when you're thinking about how to name some of these, like some of the things that you think about.
Yeah, the great thing about the membership model was it allowed us to experiment with a bunch of different styles sort of quickly, because we were having to give members these beers once a month. And so really our rule was we just want to make beer that we want to drink. We just want to enjoy what we're brewing. And if other people happen to enjoy it too, that's great. And then one really great piece of advice that we got when Kate was still in law school in Maine, she was able to meet with the founder of Magic Hat Brewing. And the piece of advice that he gave us was to buy a 7-barrel system, which we didn't listen to. And then he said, always make beer that people want to have more than one of. And so that was sort of our guiding principle when we were developing recipes. And so we didn't do anything super crazy at first. We just wanted really high quality beer that enough people would want, so that we could sell out our memberships, right? So we didn't want to do anything super experimental and lose customers who really weren't into that, right? So we needed people, especially our first round. We were like, why are people buying this membership? They don't know us. They have never had our beer before, but for some reason they're buying a membership and completely trusting that this is going to be good. So we didn't want to mess it up. So our first lineup was our Sandra Day IPA, which has an interesting story behind the name. Merkel's Thursday was our wheat beer. We did a stout. So we did pretty classic styles. And that worked for us. People really got a kick out of it. And then during the holidays, we would maybe do a fun, that's when we started doing beers that, I think our first winter release was a cardamom stout, right? So we started playing a little bit. And then as we got more members and as we sort of, our reputation for our beer grew, then we were able to do some more experimental stuff and go that route. So, but we still do like to keep it pretty approachable even today. But yeah, so the names, it's one of the more fun things I get to do as the owner, is just like name beers. And we're very collaborative as a group. So there's a group of probably 6 or 7 of us now that volunteers, and then Kate and Jen and I, we're all volunteers still. None of us get paid for this, but so between the 7 or 8 of us, we'll brainstorm names that way, or sometimes it just comes to one of us and we'll just be like, hey, can we call the beer whatever. So the Sandra Day IPA, though, was really interesting. That was our very first release ever. That was our very first beer that we ever released. And the American Bar Association had a blog, and one of their blog writers had discovered our Indiegogo campaign. So even before we opened, we were getting a little bit of attention from the American Bar Association, which was pretty cool. And so what they were asking was, what would you name your legal themed beer? So it was just a really fun little blog post, and all of these lawyers started commenting like really fun beer names. And then the next day we got this email from somebody who was just like, Mom wants an IPA. And Kate read the email and she's like, why is somebody emailing us about what kind of beer their mom wants? Like, this is very weird. But she opened the email and it was from Sandra Day O'Connor's son. And he had written the email and just said, hey, my mom read that blog, and she would, because people were putting her name into these beer styles. And so I think the suggestion was the Sandra Day O Porter was what the suggestion was. And so her son Scott had emailed and just said she would actually prefer an IPA. So if you could have a Sandra Day IPA, that would be great. And we were like, okay. So we did it. So we brewed an IPA and named it after her. So that was probably the most epic way that we've come across naming a beer. But the others are just sort of fun. The back in St. Olaf Rose Blonde is just a fun little tip to the Golden Girls. So we get to have fun with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes it interesting for those of us drinking beer, you know?
Yeah.
So you now have your own tap room, but you went from your 300-foot space, then you shared space with another brewery for a while, and ventured out yourself. So tell us a little bit about how that progression went. Because I think it's useful for people that are thinking about starting something to realize, like, you don't start with what your ultimate dream spot is out of the gate, but there's these kind of steps you have to take.
Yes. So our little garage, 300 square foot space, after our third membership round, we were just outgrowing it and like almost literally bursting at the seams. We couldn't fit all of the bottles that we needed in there for our members, and we couldn't fit all of our equipment anymore, and our memberships were growing, but with our 1.5 barrel system, we only had so much capacity. And so we were like, I think it's time to move somewhere bigger and update our equipment and brew, brew a bigger capacity. So we ended up sharing space with another brewery in town. And, it's interesting in the beer world, there's just a lot of laws, and they're all state by state, what you can do and what you can't do with beer. And so a couple of breweries in Denver had figured out that breweries could actually share space with each other under an alternating proprietorship. And so because for a while it was really hard to share space with the brewery because there's all these laws about how you distribute beer out of there. So you can't go and pick up a crowler of guest beer and take it out of the brewery in Colorado. And so it's really hard to share space and be creative and cooperative in that way because of alcohol laws. But a couple breweries have figured it out. And so now this was an option to be able to share, to have 2 or 3 breweries under one roof became, I guess it had always been possible, but nobody had studied the law enough to totally understand it. And so we did that. We moved in with another brewery and we shared space with them for about 9 months. And their brew space in the back, they had enough room where they could sort of section off a corner of it just for us. And so we were able to buy a 4-barrel system. So we upgraded to 4 barrels and got some bigger fermenters and were able to brew more beer. And then we were able to use 2 of their tap lines to serve beer in the tap room. So for the first time ever, we were able to have beer on tap. But we were able to do it in a way where it was only 2 or 3 tap lines at a time. And so we could still brew part-time and still keep it sort of manageable. And then we would run the tap room on Sundays. So Sundays sort of became Lady J days there. And so that's when our members would come pick up their beer and get to know us. And so yeah, and that was great because it opened us up to a new audience who maybe hadn't had our beer before. And for the first time ever, you could go to a space and try our beer before buying a membership.
Yeah.
Which was great. Yeah.
Oh, one of the things I loved about it, Betsy, was, to get to, yes, it's good beer. And yes, I like what the company stands for. But then to get to go in and get to meet the 3 of you and chat with you about, Kate's from Maine. I grew up in Maine, nice. It then puts like a human face on the company. And so I think you guys have done that really well, the way you interact with your customers.
Yeah. So our membership model really allowed us to get to know our first customers really well because they would stop by once a month and we would always brew their next month's beer on those pickup days. So people could see us brewing their beer and they could ask questions about it. And they would come by, they'd bring their kids by to pick up the beer. So we got to know like their families and it became this sort of tight-knit group. And then as the memberships grew, it was really wonderful because we still got face-to-face time with every single person who came to pick up their membership because we were the ones handing the beer out. So we got to know our customers very well, which helped us understand their beer styles and their preferences and what sort of nonprofits they wanted to see us support. And then when we moved in to the brewery space, what we got to do is hold events, which was really, really great for us because being able to bring in, what we would do is we would hold events where our members could come in and learn about the nonprofits that they were supporting through their beer. So it was just this wonderful way of being able to showcase the philanthropic side and showcase these amazing nonprofits and still be able to drink beer and have fun and get to know each other. So being able to connect with our customers has always been a really integral part of Lady Justice and really, really important. So even in the tap room today, we're seeing new people that we've never seen or met before, but we always try to make it a point to say hello and get to know people because because it feels good to have those relationships with our customers. And as a customer, it feels good to me when I can sort of have my neighborhood bar, or my neighborhood store, like the shops that we go to. It feels really good when the owner or the people on staff know my name and can say hi and we can catch up. And so we try to do that as often as possible, even today.
Well, and I love that you had the commitment to not only let your customers know that they were doing good, sort of by buying the beer, that it was going to go out to support organizations, which I want to ask you more about in a minute, but that you then expose them, and the nonprofits got to know your community, your beer members got to know the nonprofits that you had like handpicked to support. So, you're leveraging your business actually to get more exposure with the nonprofits and vice versa, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it really helped us sort of, Denver especially the Denver beer scene just naturally is very philanthropic. Mm-hmm. So it was never a new thing that we were supporting nonprofits through beer. Denver's done that for a long time. And I think a lot of breweries all over the country do that too, but it's especially true here in Denver. But the special thing about us was that our mission was to be philanthropic. Mm-hmm. And that has sort of allowed us to have this sort of niche space where we now will get requests from all sorts of nonprofits, or we'll get requests from like woman lawyer groups or women in technology. So we've sort of been able to garner this reputation for being the brewery that you reach out to for these specific things. We also do a lot of collaborations with musicians and artists. So we have beers, we'll name a beer after an artist. And we just did this a couple months ago with Jen Cordy, who is a Denver musician. She released her new single using our beer cans, right? And so just to be able to be collaborative as often as possible only helps us in our business model, but it also helps us be more connected to our community and understand our community's needs.
Absolutely. Well, I'm sure, as the buzz about Lady Justice grows, you've got nonprofits lining up that would love to have your support. So tell us a little bit, about what criteria do you use to figure out what organizations that serve women and girls that you want to support?
Yeah, so on the most general level, as long as the nonprofit somehow supports women and girls, we will give them money. That can be very specific ways, and that can also be more general. So, we one of the organizations that we've given money to in the past is called Women's Wilderness, and so that's very specifically a women-focused nonprofit doing outdoor work, right? So women gaining leadership skills and self-esteem and all, so that's very specific. And then the last nonprofit that we supported last month was called Dream Culture USA, and they are a youth-based organization that serves all genders. And so we were fine with pointing money their direction as well, just because we knew that the experiences that all of those kids had, girls in the program were getting something really special and quality out of that, right? So we're pretty broad in those terms. And then really, when we first opened through the memberships, we were doing grants. So we had a little grant. So all of the money would go into this little grant fund that we had, and then people could, nonprofits could apply for grant money, but then we also had a girls specific grant. So girls themselves, ages 11 to 17, could apply for a grant for a program that they wanted to be a part of. And so we would try to give some money to one or two girls, and then some money to, one or two nonprofits to sort of split that. And that worked really well for us. When we grew and moved into the other brewery and was sharing space, we tried out this model of choosing the nonprofits ahead of time. And so people knew where their money was going when they bought the memberships. And that also worked really well. And both of them work well because, you know, when the nonprofits know ahead of time, they can get really excited about it. They can bring their people to the brewery. We can have these events where they can meet. And then on the other hand, the grants, it allows us to learn more and sort of, you know, widen our knowledge of nonprofits that are out there that need some funding. And so even if nonprofits applied and didn't get money in that round, a lot of times we still go through that list and say like, oh, like I remember this nonprofit, they were really cool. We couldn't give money to them then, but like, what if we can do it now? So both methods worked really well. And then the girls grants, that was cool too, to just watch girls learn how to advocate for themselves and apply for a grant is a really cool value and something special. And so getting to know those girls' stories and just being able to read their grant applications was just always the best thing ever. So we would choose grants based off of, you know, all of the criteria. We'd read all the grants and we could be like, hey, you know, it's very clear that this group and these girls really focused in on this and they took it seriously and their story is just so amazing. We just have to go for it. Other times it would just be like a member would say like, hey, I've been supporting this cool nonprofit. You should look into them and check them out. And we would and be like, this is awesome. Let's give them some money. One of the more special ones we did was we discovered a teacher in Colorado Springs at Mitchell High School. I cannot remember the name of the platform right now, but there's a website that allows teachers to upload their needs for their classrooms. Donors Choose, right? So Donors Choose allows nonprofits to say like, hey, I need help. So we were looking at the Donors Choose website and found there's a lot of teachers who put their needs up there. And so we found this teacher in Colorado Springs who needed to buy civics books for his civics class. They couldn't afford books for their class, which I thought was just so sad. I'm like, you're a civics teacher who teaches civics and you can't afford the textbooks to teach your class. That's a whole nother podcast or, you know, presentation. But so he was wanting, he was needing to buy civics textbooks, but he was also wanting to teach his classroom. They were going to go compete at a national civics debate. So like he really needed these books so that they could be so prepared and like beat everybody, right? And so we just said it was sort of outside the norm, you know. We're like, we don't really just like pick a website and just go give to it, but this seems really special. It's local. And so they were one of our pre-chosen groups that we told our members about. And one of our members was like, I'm an alum of that high school. How can I help even more? And so this member ended up, he got in touch with that teacher and he's like, what else do you need? And the teacher's like, well, I coach the girls basketball team and they can't afford shoes. And so he bought the girls basketball team their basketball shoes, you know? So it was this really great moment where we were able to do something very specific and very needed for this one classroom that ended up sort of growing because our members had a personal connection there. So stuff like that happens every once in a while, and it's just really special to see that stuff work out.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think you all, because you had worked with nonprofits, you know, I think for some starting up companies that are like, you know, on the wheel trying to get the business going, trying to figure out like who to support from the beginning is sometimes a little daunting. So I think you've given some great examples of what that can look like, and that doesn't have to be just one thing. And I think the whole Donors Choose model, like a lot of people do use that as a way, if they want to support education, to find out, well, who's local, who needs what. And it is crazy, some of the things they need, like seriously, civics textbooks for a civics class.
Yeah.
That, you know, yeah, all right, we won't go there. But, or you can run your own grant program, and it, you know, like for organizations, like it probably gets a little dicier trying to figure out how to give it directly to individuals. But I don't know that.
Yeah, with the girls, what we would do is they had to have a nonprofit that we funded a couple of girls to go to basketball camp. And
Okay.
so we were able to pay, it was a nonprofit basketball camp. So we were able to pay their tuition to camp directly. So so we've never given money to an individual person. It always has to go to an organization. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And it's nice to have those options because,
Mm-hmm.
play around with stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So let's talk about what's going on now. So you have
Mm-hmm.
a new tap room and you got it right when COVID hit,
Yeah.
which is just
Yes.
lovely timing.
Yes. Yeah, so we were in our shared brew space, we were growing, and it became pretty clear that we needed our own space and we were ready to just finally go for it and do it and have our own brick and mortar and our own tap room. And so we started searching for spaces and had some possibilities, and nothing ended up feeling right or seeming like the right fit. So we actually spent a lot of time, something that if you're trying to build a business, you're trying to start something, especially if it's purpose driven, give yourselves grace to have it take a very, very, very long time, right? So searching for a space took a long time. And then we finally found it. We finally found the space. It was perfect. It had already been a brewery, so it had a 7-barrel system in there already. It had everything we needed. We didn't need to buy anything new. It had the tap room built in. It was in good shape. The tables and chairs were there. It was all there. And so we went for it. We bought the space from a different brewery. And we signed. Our lease there went into effect on March 15th, and Colorado state mandated shutdown happened on March 18th.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, you have got to be kidding me. Well, what did I just do? Right. So for the first time, we went into debt. We were lucky enough to borrow money from a friend of ours who could afford the sale. And so I was like, for the first time ever, we're in debt to somebody, and we can't even use our space now. Mm-hmm. So that was a little bit scary. But we had a little bit of time. We weren't ready to open right away on March 15th anyway. So we had some time to figure it out. And we got together, our special core group of folks got together and just really talked about it and said, how are we going to do this? And so it was announced that breweries could do a to-go model and could deliver, and that was brand new. Delivering beer in Colorado was not legal until COVID.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so it was like, oh, we can we personally can deliver beer for the first time now. This is awesome.
I got
yeah. And to-go beer has been legal, but it's not legal in all states, so a lot of breweries all over the country were really struggling because it's not, beer laws are very strange. But in Colorado, at least to-go beer was already an option. That's how we had always done that was essentially our membership model, was to-go beer. And so we just said, hey, we already know how to do this. We've been doing to-go beer for the last 3 years, 4 years. This is not a hard pivot for us. We've already done this, and we already know how to do it, and we already have the equipment to do it. So let's just do another membership round and just see what we can accomplish. And so the big shift for us was, for the first time, we could brew a lot of beer, so 7 barrels. And we do have a brewer that we've hired part-time, so we're able to pay Amy to brew for us part-time. And so we worked with Amy, and for the first time been able to brew on a larger scale. So for the first time now, 4 years after opening, we finally bought that 7-barrel system that everybody told us to buy at the beginning. And so we just went for it, and we ended up with, the last time we did a membership round, we were probably around 150 members. And this time I think we hit 340. So we over doubled our membership just like that overnight. And that sort of changed everything for us. And so we were doing great. The first 6 weeks so we opened, our first pickups opened on April 18th. and everybody got their 4 beers all at once, either delivered or they came and picked it up. And so it allowed people to come check us out and see the space, even though they couldn't go in. And, you know, and we got to meet people again. We got to hand them their beer directly and get to know them a little bit. And so it worked for about 6 weeks. Um, and then we were able to finally open up the tap room to have people come in. And so now for the first time, I think we've been open a month now, in the tap room. So our grand opening was very not grand at all in that sense. But so very quietly, we just sort of opened the tap room doors, and for the first time have our own tap room now.
But you did do a celebration, a remote with musicians,
Yes.
and you know, you
Yeah.
pivoted to be like, okay, we're going to celebrate anyway.
Oh yeah. So when we launched that CSB membership, we had people. We have close relationships with a lot of musicians in town because in a past life I had a small part-time career as a musician, and so I just sort of rallied my musician troops and was just like, hey, can you broadcast a show from your house on the Lady Justice, you know, social media? And of course I said yes, and that was actually, it was so fun to have that. And so that, again, collaborative model, Lady J fans got to listen to cool music that they might not have heard before and support a local musician, which was also very important during this time. And then those musicians had fans who were introduced to Lady Justice for the first time. So it was great. We made a lot of money that weekend because of that. And I think the musicians probably got some decent tips out of that too. So the collaborative work during COVID has really been helpful to us and has maybe helped us survive during this time, actually, because we lost a lot of momentum. We were, you know, we had a lot of events lined up and people were really excited about coming. And then once COVID hit, all of that went away. And so, but it wasn't just for us, everybody was in this boat. And so working with our community to figure out, like, what do you need and what do we have and how can we work together to make this happen, has been huge for us. So we'll continue to collaborate with people in that way. That's sort of who we are anyway. We would have done it without COVID, but now especially it's just another part of our business model that's just here and probably here for a long time.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's probably a really good tip for other folks that are either have started something already or thinking about starting. It's like, so how do you like have these like multiple networks of community that you can engage with and do win-win? If it's not events, it can be something else. And it strengthens everybody.
Yeah, and you find, like, especially being a purpose-driven business, people want to be involved in that. And I had a musician friend of mine call me last night at like 9 o'clock, and she was like, "Hey, I've got this cool new project that I'm doing, and I need Lady J to be a part of it." And so, so that's happening. We're doing another collaboration beer music release with another musician in town. We're doing a mural artist collaboration. So there's no reason not to do it because we all have communities that support us who want to do more good work and they want to be a part of something really cool. And this is cool. Like, it is cool. Like, it's cool to be able to make a beer for a musician, and it's cool for a musician to have their like face on a beer label, right? So people want to be a part of that, right? And so there's no reason to try to do anything on your own. There is no reason to try to be stubborn and be, you know, obviously there's business decisions and some gut checks that only have to happen as ownership. But as a business model, I don't see any reason why people shouldn't be collaborating, especially if it's a purpose-driven business, because you need to have those networks, and there's no reason to work harder than you need to, because we already work so hard anyway. This is hard work. It's not always monetarily rewarding because we're giving all of our money away, but if you can harness the power of your community, there's no reason not to do it. It will only produce good things for you.
And another thing I just heard you mention that I think is a great thing that I just want to underscore is, you have mentioned that you talked to a lot of people, got guidance from a lot of different sources, and then you all did the reality check of, okay, people are saying get the big machine. And you were like, no, that didn't feel right for kind of what you were planning as your rollout. And so to trust yourself to say, okay, yeah, we get why that makes sense, but we're choosing consciously not to do it that way. And hopefully we'll grow into that, but to not feel like there's anything wrong with kind of going against some of that guidance. I mean, once in a while, maybe you should have listened to it, but in your case around this, it sounds like it worked out in a really good way. Because if you'd started with the big dog thing first, you might have put yourself out of business before you even really got in business.
Yeah, being able to trust your gut is really, really important. And we learned very early on that especially Kate's gut reactions to things were usually correct. And so if Kate was ever like, this doesn't feel good, I don't want to do this, we would say, okay, let's not do it. And so just and that really just comes from truly understanding your mission and your purpose for the work that you're doing. And if you do really understand that and are in tune with that, those decisions are pretty easy to make. I mean, sometimes they're hard to make, but a lot of times if you're just like, ugh, this doesn't feel good, just don't do it. And a lot of times when people are doing purpose-driven work, what they're doing is outside of the norm. And so we did not invent, like I said earlier, we did not invent breweries giving money to nonprofits. That had already been happening. But what we did was sort of change the conversation and change the approach. And so there are times when you're gonna just by default be a little bit groundbreaking. And so when you're doing that stuff, it might not make sense to follow the business model that everybody else is following, because the business model that everybody else is following is, bottom line profit, which is important. You should pay attention to those things. But if you also know that, like, hey, like for Lady J, it's like, well, hey, we have to make enough money to have a real impact on the nonprofit that we're giving to. So we have to do this carefully and make sure that we're not spending too much too early, and that we're not being exorbitant, and like, we can't spend too much on the fancy stuff and the bells and whistles. We just can't. And then we learn, like, as we were growing, it's like, okay, well, now we can get that bell or that whistle, and that's great. And now we can do this and do that. And especially during COVID, it's just hard. It's just hard to afford anything. And so you have to be really nimble. But yeah, trusting your gut, I think, is just the most important thing that you can do. Because if you understand the work that you're trying to do, you'll understand that. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't seek out advice. We seek out advice any chance that we can get. And then some of it works for us and some of it doesn't. And that's fine. But yeah, you'll know if it feels good or not. And you should always trust that.
Yeah. And to not be afraid to do it sort of in, okay, when I say baby steps, they're all actually pretty big steps, but to have a sequence of things, like you started small and, you had your initial logo, and now you've got, this beautiful new branding. And
that branding was free, by the way, because of our philanthropic mission and who we are as a company. That branding company, Cole Studio, is like, hey, we want to do this for you for free. And we're like, yeah, sure. So good things will come. Yeah. Yeah.
Great. So is it in your kind of plan moving forward that one or all three of you want to move out of your day jobs to do Lady J like more full-time? Although you probably all feel like you're kind of, especially you, probably feel like you're doing 2 full-time jobs right now.
It is 2 full-time jobs, only one of which I get paid for, which is great. I'm very grateful for my paying job, because it allows me to do this work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I think dream world down the line, I think we would like to be involved in getting paid full-time for sure. um, Especially with COVID happening. I don't think that'll happen for a long time. But yeah, the dream is to just continue to grow and continue to keep doing this work. And if one day I get to pay myself for it, like that's awesome. But also we were very intentional about making sure that we pay people fairly, and that the benefits and all of that we provide are at least equal to what the community, the rest of the brewing community is doing. So we want our employees, and granted, we also do this. I mean, we have a very strong volunteer network, and so our overhead on personnel is actually quite small, which is great. And people do that because they want to, and it makes them really happy. But when we get to the point where we have to start hiring people full time and really making this a full blown thing, being able to pay people well. We want the best candidates, and we want to pay them the most money. And doing that while also giving your money away is really hard to do, right? And so figuring out how to be a sound, ethical company in terms of our employment and our HR practices is also just as important to us as being philanthropic. So
Yeah.
there's a balance, and it takes a long time.
And it's walking your talk internally as well as externally,
Yes, yeah.
Like, I think it's cool that, I mean, you support nonprofits that deal with women and girls and give programs for them, and you hired a female brewer. Like, yay, it's like you got to walk your talk and be out there like in an authentic way. So I think you guys have done a really good job with that.
Yeah, and that's sort of what that was an unintended special thing that happened. So as Lady Justice, we're all female owned and operated. We didn't do that intentionally, but it just sort of happened because Jenna, Kate, and I were all women. But the number of solely female owned breweries in the United States is quite small. So we're a part of 7% of that. And then on top of that, I think only 1 or 2% of brewers are women. So we were hitting these 2 very unique sets of data that became very important to other people. So we didn't intend for that to happen, but because of who we are as a company and who we hire and how we were operating, it was really important to other, especially women in the industry, to see what we were doing. And we had never considered that this would be important to other people. Like, we really didn't. And that might sound silly, but like, we just never thought about it that way. And then we started getting, notes and emails from women who are like, thank you for what you're doing. Seeing you do this helps me believe that I can do this. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, didn't mean for that to happen. So we've gotten more business because of that too, which helps.
Absolutely. Well, and you're able to live your own values, and, like, there's actually something cool about, it wasn't intentional.
Yeah, we really didn't think about it in those terms.
Reasons, and other people like us better because of this. Yeah. So you've mentioned a couple things about challenges for purpose-driven businesses. So based on your experience with Lady J, any as we're starting to wind down here, any or words of caution you'd like to share with people about what it takes to pull this off?
It takes a lot. I mean, it's just really hard work. It's constantly a grind. You have to have this, I think you just have to have a lot of motivation and a lot of grit to do this work. It's not always easy to find funding to do this work because profits go out the door to do good stuff. And so it takes a long time to find people to believe in this as a business model. And this purpose-driven businesses and social enterprise, it's growing, but we're still we're still a small group of people doing this work. And so I would just say you have to enjoy it. You have to be passionate about what you're doing. There will be very, very hard days where you want to give up. And my advice is always that, like, if you can picture what this thing will be in 5 years and what you are imagining makes you happy, just keep doing it and you'll get there, and you'll just grind along, and it'll be slow, but it'll be meaningful. But if you close your eyes and you think, what is this in 5 years? And it doesn't make you happy, be okay with walking away from it or changing your model or pivoting, or trying something new. Because if you don't believe in the work that you're doing, you will burn out immediately. And so give yourself permission to explore what you're doing and why you're doing it. And if it makes you be able to have that endurance to keep going. Because I think a lot of people think that, you started this thing and you just have to keep going with it. But you don't always have to. You can say no to things that don't feel good, because if you don't have the energy and the endurance, don't waste your time, because you'll end up miserable.
Absolutely. Well, and that 3 of you are still working other jobs and working on this, it's fulfilling something within you, and
Mm-hmm.
that you're actually doing good out.
Yeah.
As you can see in the chat, you got some feedback here. Great interview. What I enjoyed hearing was, like many of our fellow citizens, you guys have 2 jobs, but you at least you have one that you love and enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do also enjoy my day job, which helps too. But yeah, thanks, Edwin. Yeah, you have to, again, it's all about it. Sometimes when you're doing purpose-driven work, especially if you're in nonprofits, the burnout is real, and sometimes it's really hard. So you have to have love and joy for at least something that you're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Betsy, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
You're burning the midnight oil, getting everything done that you have to
Yeah.
do. And I've enjoyed hearing more about Lady Justice, and I'm sure everybody that was listening live, thank you for being here. And the folks that are going to listen later, they're going to learn about sort of what's possible, and
Yeah.
take an idea that, came out over a few beers.
Yeah, everybody go enjoy some Vice today, because maybe it'll turn into your next business.
Into something that's really respected and people want to be part of. And
Yeah.
so kudos to you and the whole team. And
Thanks.
I wish you the best given all the COVID stuff, and opened up the tap room. And
Yeah.
I look forward to stopping by one of these days and see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. This was great. And it's always good to see you, Sue.
Okay. Thanks. Bye-bye, everybody. See you later on
Bye.
the session. Thanks for coming. Bye-bye.